We're not hiring you." The words came from Principal Margaret Davies, cold and final. Sarah Johnson sat across the desk, teaching degree in hand, references impeccable, interview perfect. But Margaret's eyes said everything. Wrong color skin, wrong neighborhood, wrong everything. You're just not a good fit for Riverside Academy. 20 years later, Sarah walked into that same office. But this time, she wasn't asking for a job. She was offering one. Because Sarah Johnson was now the superintendent, and Margaret Davies, who'd refused to hire her based on prejudice, was sitting in Sarah's old chair, begging to keep her job. Everyone expected revenge. Everyone expected Sarah to fire the woman who'd discriminated against her. What Sarah did instead would teach an entire district what grace actually looks like. If Sarah's choice to forgive instead of retaliate moves you, take a moment to like and subscribe. It genuinely helps more people discover these stories of grace over revenge. Now, back to Sarah. 20 years before she'd face the woman who crushed her dreams. 20 years ago, 2005, Atlanta, Georgia. Sarah Johnson was 23 years old and full of dreams. She'd just graduated from Clark Atlanta University, English education degree, 3.9 GPA, teaching recommendations that said exceptional, passionate, natural educator. And there was an opening at Riverside Academy. High school English teacher, prestigious private school in suburban Atlanta, $35,000 annual tuition, 100% college acceptance rate. Sarah's dream, teaching high-achieving students, sharing her love of literature, changing lives. The interview was scheduled for March. Sarah wore her best outfit, professional but modest, what her family could afford. She arrived early, 15 minutes, never late. She prepared lesson plans, teaching philosophy, sample lessons. When Principal Margaret Davies emerged into the waiting room, Sarah stood, extended her hand, smiled. Margaret's eyes froze. Just a second. But Sarah saw it, recognized it. That look, shock, discomfort, instant assessment from a white woman seeing a black woman. "Ms. Johnson," Margaret shook her hand. Quick, cold. "Come in." Within the first 5 minutes of the interview, Sarah knew it was over. Margaret asked questions, standard, mechanical. But her eyes didn't meet Sarah's eyes, looked at the resume, at the window, at the wall, not at Sarah. "So, Ms. Johnson," Margaret finally said, "why do you want to teach at Riverside?" Sarah took a deep breath. "Be honest, be passionate, show yourself, because I believe literature transforms lives. A book can open a student's world. And at Riverside, with high-achieving students, I can teach complex texts, challenge critical thinking, share my love of literature." Margaret nodded, but her eyes still avoided. "And your experience?" "During my teacher training, 2 semesters of student teaching at Clark Atlanta, and last summer I volunteered at a reading program for low-income students." "Low income," Margaret cut in. "So, inner-city schools?" "Yes, but Riverside is different. Our students have different backgrounds, different expectations, different culture." There it was, the code word. Culture, Sarah's stomach knotted. But she kept smiling, stayed professional, remained hopeful. "I understand. And I believe I can adapt to any student population. Literature is universal." "Ms. Johnson," Margaret stood. The interview had lasted 15 minutes. "Thank you for your application. You'll hear from us within 2 weeks." But Sarah knew. Within 2 weeks, a rejection letter, politely worded. "We've selected other candidates. Keep searching. Best of luck." And that's exactly what happened. That night, Sarah returned to her small apartment, modest place in Atlanta, half an hour from her mother's house, and cried. Because Margaret Davies's reason for rejecting her wasn't clear, wasn't incompetent, wasn't inexperienced. It was Sarah. Sarah was the wrong type. But Sarah didn't give up. Applied. Every school in Atlanta. Public schools, private schools, charter schools. Finally got an offer. Douglas High School, public school in Atlanta. Low-income neighborhood. 50% graduation rate. Old buildings. Insufficient funding. Sarah accepted. Because she wanted to be a teacher. And at Douglas, where students lacked every advantage, maybe she could really make a difference. First year was tough. Students were skeptical. Another young white teacher. Oh wait, black. Black, but talks white. Sarah's educated speech was mocked. Why you talk like that? You trying to be white? No, Sarah calmly replied. I'm trying to be myself. And myself is educated, passionate, and someone who believes you'll succeed. Slowly, students warmed up. Sarah was different. She cared. Came early, stayed late, spent her own money on books, spent her own time on extra help. And something amazing happened. Students learned. Second year, Sarah's students exceeded district average on state English tests. Third year, even better. Fourth year, Sarah was selected Teacher of the Year, Douglas High, and someone noticed. Assistant principal position opened. Internal promotion. Sarah applied. Accepted. As assistant principal, Sarah didn't just teach. She ran the school, coordinated programs, managed teachers, handled discipline, and she was excellent. 5 years later, principal position opened. Different school. Washington High, slightly better than Douglas. Sarah applied. Accepted. As principal, Sarah transformed Washington. Graduation rate rose from 60% to 80%. College acceptances increased. Teacher morale soared. And the district noticed. 10 years later, Sarah was now 38. She was promoted to district administrator, overseeing educational programs, responsible for multiple schools. 15 years later, she became chief academic officer, in charge of all academic programs in the district. And 20 years later, 2025, Sarah was 43, she was selected as superintendent. Atlanta Metro School District, 40 schools, 30,000 students, 2,000 teachers, and one of those schools was Riverside Academy. First day, January 2025, Sarah entered the district office. Her new office, spacious, corner, windows overlooking Atlanta. On her desk was a stack of files, 40 principals, each requiring file review. Her assistant, Linda Chen, efficient, professional, sorted the files. Dr. Johnson, you should start with priorities. Riverside Academy. Margaret Davies, principal. She's been there 25 years. Sarah froze. Riverside Academy. Margaret Davies. Problem? Linda asked. No, Sarah said slowly. Just a familiar name. Linda opened Margaret's file. Riverside is the district's most prestigious private school. But performance is declining. Last 5 years, graduation dropped from 100% to 92%. Teacher turnover rate 30%. Parent complaints increasing. Complaints? About what? Lack of diversity. Student population 95% white, 90% wealthy. Parents want change. But Margaret Davies is resisting. Says she's preserving tradition. Sarah laughed bitterly. 20 years later, and Margaret was still preserving culture. I need to meet with her, Sarah said. Linda looked at her skeptically. You sure? Most superintendents just do office meetings the first month. I'm sure. Next day, Sarah drove to Riverside Academy, the place she'd interviewed 20 years ago. The building was the same, prestigious brick, manicured lawn, wealth everywhere. But this time, Sarah wasn't coming as a supplicant. She was coming as the boss. The receptionist, elderly white woman, could have been there 20 years ago, looked Sarah up and down. Can I help you? Yes, I'm Dr. Sarah Johnson, the new district superintendent. I'd like to see Principal Davies. The receptionist's face went white. Oh, of course. One moment. Called. Whispered. Panicked. 5 minutes later, Margaret Davies emerged from the hallway, and when Sarah saw her, time collapsed. 20 years ago, Margaret was late 40s, confident, powerful, in control. Now she was late 60s, tired, anxious, fragile, hair completely white, face lined, but her eyes, those eyes recognized Sarah immediately and saw fear. "Dr. Johnson," Margaret said quietly. "Welcome to Riverside." "Thank you, Principal Davies. Can we talk?" "Of course. Come to my office." Same office, 20 years later. But now, when Sarah walked through the door, she wasn't powerless. She was the supervisor. Margaret sat behind her desk, defensive, familiar ground. Sarah sat across, calm, prepared. "So," Margaret began, voice trembling, You're the superintendent." "Yes. How long have you been in education?" 20 years. Started as a teacher, then assistant principal, then district administrator, now superintendent." Silence. "Do you remember me, Margaret?" Margaret swallowed. "Yes, 20 years ago. You interviewed to teach here. And what did you say?" "I didn't hire you." "Why?" Margaret's hands trembled. Why, Margaret?" Sarah's voice wasn't sharp, just determined. "Because," Margaret said quietly, "I thought you weren't suitable." "For Riverside." "Why?" "Because," tears came, "because you were black, and Riverside was white, and I was prejudiced, and I was so wrong." Silence lasted several minutes. "You know," Sarah finally said, "that rejection almost broke me. I was 23, fresh graduate, full of dreams, and you told me I wasn't enough. Not because of my skills, because of my skin color." Margaret nodded, crying. "For 20 years," Sarah continued, "I thought about that moment. Every tough day, every discrimination, every door slammed in my face. And I asked myself, do I want revenge or justice?" Margaret looked up, fear in her eyes. "And I know," Sarah said, "that today I could fire you. For discrimination, for declining performance, for teacher turnover, for parents demanding diversity. I have a dozen reasons." Margaret's face collapsed. "But I won't." Margaret froze. "What? I won't fire you?" "Because revenge isn't justice. Revenge just continues the cycle. So, I keep my job?" "Conditionally," Sarah said. "Here are the conditions. Riverside will change. Diversity will increase. Scholarship programs will expand for low-income students. Teacher hiring will be fair. And you, Margaret, will lead the change. I don't know how. I'll teach you. We'll work together. Your 30 years of experience and my 20 years of vision. Riverside won't just be prestigious. It'll be inclusive," Margaret cried. With relief, with shock, with gratitude. "Why?" she whispered. "Why are you forgiving me?" Sarah smiled, small, sad. "Because someone has to break the cycle. And I remember what I taught at Douglas. I taught my students that anger isn't power. Forgiveness is power. Now I have to live that." From that day, Riverside Academy changed. First year, Margaret, with Sarah's guidance, launched a scholarship program. 10 low-income students, all students of color, joined Riverside with full scholarships. Second year, 20 students. Teacher hiring diversified. Curriculum included multicultural perspectives. Third year, Riverside reached 30% diversity. And performance increased. Graduation rose to 98%, highest ever. Fourth year brought something unexpected. A parent, wealthy white father, child at Riverside, approached Sarah at a school board meeting. "Dr. Johnson, I need to apologize." Sarah turned. "Didn't recognize him. My name is Robert Mitchell. My daughter is a senior at Riverside. When you announced the diversity initiative, I was resistant. I signed a petition against it. I believed it would lower standards." Sarah waited. "I was wrong," Robert continued, voice breaking. "My daughter's best friend is now Alicia, one of the scholarship students. Alicia is brilliant, top of their class, heading to Yale. And she's taught my daughter more about resilience, hard work, and overcoming obstacles than I ever could." He paused, wiping his eyes. "I learned that diversity doesn't lower standards. My prejudice did. Thank you for not listening to parents like me. Thank you for changing Riverside. You saved it." Sarah shook his hand. "Thank you for being willing to change your mind." Fifth year, something remarkable happened at Riverside's graduation ceremony. Margaret Davies, now 70 years old, approached the podium to give her final speech before retirement. 25 years ago, Margaret began, her voice steady despite emotion. "I became principal of Riverside Academy. I was proud. This was a school of tradition, excellence, prestige. And I protected that. Fiercely. Maybe too fiercely." She paused, looking at the diverse graduating class before her. 5 years ago, our new superintendent came to my office, Dr. Sarah Johnson, and I was terrified, because 20 years earlier, I had discriminated against her, refused to hire her because of the color of her skin, and now she had the power to fire me. The audience went silent. But she didn't fire me. She gave me something I didn't deserve, a second chance. She taught me that excellence doesn't have a color, that diversity strengthens, not weakens. That tradition worth preserving is the tradition of lifting everyone up. Margaret's voice cracked. Today, this graduating class is 30% students of color, 25% low-income scholarship recipients, and they're not diversity additions. They're our valedictorian, our salutatorian, our national merit scholars. They didn't lower our standards. They raised them, because they brought something we lacked. Hunger, resilience, perspective, standing ovation. But Margaret wasn't finished. Dr. Johnson taught me the most important lesson of my career, that the measure of a leader isn't power. It's grace, the power to hurt those who hurt you and choosing healing instead. That's leadership. After the ceremony, Sarah and Margaret, for the last time, sat in the Riverside office. "I'm grateful to you," Margaret said, "for giving me a second chance, for teaching me to change." "You changed yourself," Sarah corrected. "I just gave you the opportunity." "So you did 20 years ago what I did to you." Sarah paused. "What do you mean?" "You gave me opportunity to grow from my mistakes. I didn't give you opportunity, but you gave me one. And that's real leadership. 2 women, 1 black, 1 white, 1 rejected, 1 who rejected, embraced, and in that moment, a lesson for the entire district." Margaret Davies retired that year, but before she left, she did one final thing. She donated $500,000 to the Riverside Scholarship Fund. Money she'd saved over 30 years, now given to help students she once would have rejected. "This is how I apologize," Margaret told Sarah. "Not just with words, with action, with reparation." Sarah accepted the donation and named the scholarship the Second Chance Scholarship, for students who deserve opportunities they've been denied. 3 years later, Sarah stood before the Atlanta School Board, presenting her final report as superintendent before moving to a position at the State Department of Education. "When I started as superintendent," Sarah said, "I had a choice. I could use power to punish those who'd wronged me. Or I could use power to transform systems that wrong everyone." She pulled up statistics on the screen behind her. 5 years ago, Riverside Academy was 95% white, struggling with declining performance. Today, 35% students of color, 30% scholarship recipients, highest performance in school history. But this isn't a Riverside story. It's a district story. More statistics appeared. District-wide, we've increased diversity in every school. We've tripled scholarship funding. We've trained every administrator in equity practices. And our results? Test scores up 15%. Graduation rates up 20%. College acceptances up 30%. The board applauded. But the most important metric isn't academic. It's human. Last year, I received 2,000 letters from students, parents, and teachers. And the common theme wasn't academic achievement. It was belonging. Students who finally felt seen. Teachers who finally felt supported. Parents who finally felt heard. Sarah paused, looking directly at the audience. 20 years ago, I sat across from a principal who told me I didn't belong. That rejection could have made me bitter, could have taught me that the system would never accept people like me, but instead, it taught me what to change when I had the power. She closed her presentation. This is my final message as superintendent. Power without grace is tyranny. Justice without mercy is cruelty. Excellence without inclusion is illusion. The best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's becoming exactly who they said you couldn't be, and then using that position to make sure nobody else is told they can't. Standing ovation lasted 10 minutes. After the meeting, a young black woman, early 20s, teaching degree in hand, approached Sarah. Dr. Johnson, I just want to thank you. I applied to teach at Riverside Academy. They hired me. I start in the fall, and I know that 20 years ago, that wouldn't have happened. So thank you for changing the system, for making space for people like me. Sarah hugged her, tears flowing freely. No, Sarah whispered. Thank you for being brave enough to apply, for being excellent enough to be hired, for proving that the change was worth it. That night, Sarah received an email from Margaret Davies, now 73, fully retired, living in a quiet Atlanta suburb. The email was simple. Sarah, I saw your final speech to the board, and I want you to know you didn't just change Riverside. You changed me. 20 years ago, I saw a young black woman and thought, not qualified. Today, I see young people of every background and think, how can I help? And that transformation, from prejudice to purpose, is your legacy. Not test scores, not graduation rates. You taught an old woman that it's never too late to become better. Thank you. Margaret? Sarah read it 3 times, then responded, Margaret, transformation is never one person's work. You chose to change. You chose growth over comfort, honesty over pride. That takes courage most people never find. Thank you for being willing. Thank you for showing that people can change. That's the legacy we built together. Sarah, sometimes the greatest victory isn't defeating your enemy. It's transforming your enemy into an ally. Sometimes the strongest power isn't revenge, it's grace. And sometimes the best way to change a system isn't to burn it down, it's to rise within it, gain the power, and use that power to make sure nobody else is burned. Sarah Johnson was rejected 20 years ago because of her skin color. Today, she oversees the entire district, and the woman who rejected her? She became an advocate for the very change she once opposed. Because grace is more powerful than revenge, because forgiveness transforms more than punishment, because breaking cycles requires someone brave enough to say, not anymore. Sarah Johnson said it, and everything changed.